Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of FSW Conversations, brought to you by Fashion Strategy Weekly, which looks to bring practical, strategic, and research based insights to leaders in the fashion and luxury industries. I am Jessica Quillen, co publisher of Fashion Strategy Weekly and co founder of luxury strategy agency It's a Working Title. In this edition of FSW Conversations, I'm talking to Kate Sheldon, CEO of Fashioneering LLC and the Fashioneering Lab. Kate is a luxury fashion industry veteran with a career spanning over 3 decades. She has influenced an array of iconic brands, including Chanel, Dior, Prada, Moschino, La Perla, and many others, and is regularly featured in prestigious publications like Women's Wear Daily and others. So, Kate, thank you so much for joining us. Just to start, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how you got into the fashion industry.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me, Jessica. I really appreciate it. I'm very honored to speak with you today. So, let's see how I got into it. I think, like a lot of people, I was just a little kid who the seed of fashion, I guess the dreams kind of hit me early. And I really, when I started out as a very young person, I knew that I wanted to, I say I knew. I thought I wanted to be in some kind of international business. I had no idea what that meant other than it was going to possibly allow me to travel, and I had an interest in architecture. But what I didn't have was, frankly, the some of the skill set that would be needed to be a successful architect. And the doodles in my notebook were not of buildings; they were of dresses. So, at some point around the age of 17, I had a professor point out, maybe you should go into the fashion industry. So. I grew up in Texas, which is where I am still based, and there was a designer named Victor Costa. I say designer kind of in quotations because anyone who knows of his story, it was a little, was he a designer? Was he really a merchandiser? He was sort of famed as the knockoff king. But what he was Texas based. And so my young self decided, ooh, okay, he's from Texas, I'm from Texas. I'm going to go to school and get a job working for him. So, I guess I'm a big fan of manifestation, and so be careful what you manifest. Manifest big things for yourself. I did end up starting there, and I worked as a designer for several years as the lowest designer on the totem pole. Loved absolutely every minute of it. I didn't anticipate that companies go out of business because I'm at that time, 23, didn't really even, you don't think of those things. But sadly, that is what happened to that brand. And I found myself in a part of the country that at this time, NAFTA, this was sort of pre NAFTA, but we were evolving into NAFTA. So the manufacturing that was happening down here was kind of drying up, and so were the opportunities. So I was married at the time, needed to stay in Dallas, and to make a very, very long story short, I decided to hit up the CEO of Neiman Marcus and said I had this idea. Could I come and talk to him? He let me come talk to him. He said no to my idea, but he said, I really think you might have been a decent designer, but I think you're a really good merchant. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but I'm unemployed. So let's see what that path, brings me. So I became a merchant with Neiman Marcus Group for about a dozen years. And my area of expertise there, I was in predominantly in the French collections, and Neiman's would call it the couture department. Obviously, it's not haute couture, it was ready to wear, but most of the European brands, and I bought across different classifications, and did that for a dozen years before I launched my own consultancy. And then I guess that sort of leads us to here.
So, and I love that. And one of the questions I have is just sort of, that why you formed the Fashioneering Lab, and kind of, initially as you get into that, what about your experience at Neiman Marcus kind of shaped the way you sort of envisioned setting up the Fashioneering Lab, and kind of why did you get the inspiration to take that
Oh,
particular
I love
direction?
that question. So, in short, so when I started consulting and I launched Fashioneering in 2007, largely people would bring me in. We weren't using the term fractional at the time, but essentially like a fractional chief merchandising officer. And at times for smaller brands, it might have been like a fractional CEO, but really kind of bridging the gap because I, at that point, had the experience of working in the design studio, but I also understood the finances of it. The business, this is a business, it's a creative business, and where those two things meet. And that was a really interesting sweet spot because, as you're aware, there are very different ways of working on the creative side and on the business side. And unfortunately, in my opinion and my experience, the fact that those are very siloed, that's where we run into problems. The right hand isn't always talking to the left hand, or when they are, their calendars are off, or you don't walk into a design studio at the beginning of the ideation and stage and say, where's my hero product? That kind of thing. There's a method to the madness in that. So I had been doing that for many years, and one of the working with very well established heritage brands who knew me, candidly speaking, most of my portfolio are people who I was probably their buyer when I was at Neiman Marcus Group. So that was I was a known entity to them, but they would bring me in to sort of, you know, offer my area of expertise, but consistently I would look around and notice I could do a lot of things, but you also had issues over here and over here and over here. And, I think a lot of consultants feel this way. People have paid you a premium to come in and solve a business problem, which 100% of the time ends up being we need more sales, we need more revenue. But you cannot do it yourself, no matter who you are. And so what happens is, ownership would ask me, well, who do you know who does this? Because I might have observed there's an opportunity, like who's your CFO, or who's the chief technology officer? Could even be something like who's the technical designer, because you've got a great creative director, but we need a technical designer or PR, any number of things. So what they would do is they would say, well, who do you know? I go through my network, make a few, recommendations and move on. But it still wasn't really optimal. And this had always been kind of a rock in my shoe that I was like, there's a problem to solve for, because one of the things I found interesting was that was happening with well-established heritage brands, but it also happened with startups. Now, startups is sort of for a different reason. They don't have the budgets necessarily to go hire all the 50 people that they need, so that they kind of hire one at a time. So when COVID hit, like anybody else, I was sort of looking around and seeing so many different changes and big seismic shifts in our industry. In my opinion, the entire model, there's so much of it that is broken if we wanted to move forward. And looking at sort of my kind of to answer your question, looking at my experience with Neiman Marcus, I looked at where my successes were. 100% of the time, I could attribute them to breaking down silos and reaching out across and saying, I not for nothing, I don't know jack about how to build, a certain type of database or something like this. So I would just grab who's the CTO? Let me call him and ask him. I have this interesting idea on how we can do something to write our orders better that might drive myself through. Do you have the manpower that you could dedicate to help me build something like that out? Or the same time working with, you have a great idea on a brand that you really want to develop in all 42 stores, but there's no way I can do that if I don't get windows. So I got to get the head of visual on the phone and see how can I get in on all that. And what I noticed was this was not the normal way of working within Neiman Marcus. So I was not really good at, well, just sitting in a silo. I was like, well, who do we need on board? And if whatever your initiative is, the reality is you needed people, you needed buy-in from everyone in the company, you needed excitement from everyone in the company. So kind of taking that idea or that learning and looking at consultancy, adding so many different issues. We are looking at needing to become more sustainable, dare I say, circular, and the dream regenerative, right? We need to be embracing new technologies. We need to be more inclusive. We need to accommodate new work styles. I've been working remotely since 2007, but a whole lot of the world just figured out the pros and cons of it 4 years ago. And so you see shifts there and so many different things. So I set about with the lab and thought, all right, what if I'm going to try and solve kind of all those things, which is a little bit of a big undertaking, kind of a lofty idea. But I said, I'm going to imagine myself as the CEO of an imaginary enterprise brand today. And what do I need to move forward? And who do I need in those roles? So I sort of set about like from ground zero, who's my general counsel? It's going to be Beth Henry's. Who's going to handle, marketing? Who's going to handle design, but design from a point of view that is baking in sustainable materials and processes and things, store development, e-commerce, how do you become a B Corp? You name it, sort of all the things. And so I set out and frankly recruited a bunch of other consultants, agencies, designers, kind of preferred partners, and really formalized a network. And that became the Fashioneering Lab, which is sort of a hub and spoke model. Because the other thing I wanted to solve for was going back to that early part of my long-winded answer was that when I would make those referrals to whoever my client was and say, oh yeah, you need content strategy, you should talk to my friend Jessica, and then kind of move on. they would then meet you and they would repeat what they were needing to do, and they spend all this time doing it. And I was like, well, we're wasting time. It would be faster in a hub and spoke model where I said, Jessica, here's the client, here's what they're working on, these are what their issues are, this is their timeline, this is the budget, these are the other 5 projects they're working on, these are the other people, so that when they meet with these other spokes, they kind of hit the ground running. And so that was sort of the idea behind it. And 2 years in, it's moving pretty well.
I love that. And, kind of just to dive a little bit deeper into that, because I sort of love that sort of hub and spoke model, because I think it obviously, I mean, we all know as consultants, sort of our biggest enemy, besides, kind of vague payment details, is scope creep. And, one of the things
Yes.
I love about your hub and spoke model is that it makes things really clear. It really kind of sets
Yep.
up, kind of what needs to be done when it needs to be done. And so just to dive a little bit deeper, I'm really curious in terms of like, how do you sort of, when it comes to sort of, looking to define the work, how do you help luxury executives sort of approach complex problems and kind of break them down and solve them so that you can then know who to bring in and kind of what problems
No,
you're
great question. I mean, really, frankly, through a lot of dialogue, when they come to me, I'll say, what are your pain points? And very often they'll say, I need X. I need to bring someone in who's going to take over our wholesale and expand it because we've been in these 5 different showrooms and it's not working. And I will say, welcome to the tough love. Are you sure the issue is the showroom or is the issue actually the branding? Is the issue that you've chosen a lane that is overcrowded? Is the issue the collection itself? So really kind of I will dig into like what are your pain points? 100% of the time they find a million ways to say they need more revenue. That's the pain point. But really digging into okay, what are the issues? What is the budget? What is the timeline? And then really figuring out, okay, here's what we can do first, and then we do this, and then we do this. So we kind of develop an overarching strategy. And I understand with all the executives in residence, my designers at large, and other preferred partners, I know what they do and I know what they charge for different things. So I can kind of map out with the client an entire journey so that they understand, all right, we're going to start here. Am I going to spend $100,000 completely, overhaul my little baby brands e-commerce first day out? Probably not, but you might be doing that 3 months from now. First thing, we're probably going to revisit like your positioning, your branding, the collection itself. Maybe it's a PR issue, but so that's really kind of I first just really visiting with them, digging down to what the real issues are, and balancing that with what their resources and timeline to kind of figure out who the best people are in the best order of events.
Oh, that's amazing. The other aspect I love about your sort of approach to sort of fashion consulting, if you will, is sort of your focus on community, especially within the Fashioneering lab itself. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of why you created that sort of more community centric model towards collaborative?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it just in simple terms probably boils down to my personality. I'm very much a team-oriented person. I know that sounds cheesy, but it's true. I completely believe that fashion is a team sport, and if you can leave egos at the door, we can accomplish really great things. But the other thing was when I was looking at again sort of solving for all these pain points, one of the pain points consultants have is they can be when you're out of the corporate environment, sometimes you're out of conversations that you need to be in. And you need to have that other point of view. Let's just grab something today. We're all talking about AI and its implications. So when you're an outside consultant, you need to make sure that you're talking to a lot of different voices and getting a lot of different perspectives so that you can make the best decisions for your clients in that. So I really wanted to create an environment where we get together regularly twofold to share knowledge because again it's like we're all in our individual silo. Now let's talk about whatever the issue or opportunity is from these different angles. But also I wanted the reason community was so important to me was when projects come through and the majority of the work we do are bespoke projects, I need everyone to know each other. I need everyone to already be vibing. We're not going to waste time gelling when the client is ready to go. We are like I know it's cheesy, I guess as I am, but I use the kind of Avengers metaphor a lot that these are sort of like the fashion Avengers where sometimes you just need one or two, but they all know each other and they all understand each other's strengths. And so I just saw benefits in that as well.
I love that. So you describe your philosophy as creative thinking fashioneering. What does that concept mean to you and why is it important to kind of what you're looking to build and bring to clients?
Yeah, I mean, I always say sort of It's where those 2 things meet. That's always been my favorite sweet spot is where the creative side of the business and sort of what we think of maybe as perhaps the more analytical kind of meet together. And, other people might refer to it as sort of design thinking, but it's really kind of, again, bridging that gap. It's like you've got your creative mind over here, and we're all capable of both, I believe. It's just a muscle that we need to train. That might be a little controversial, but you've got your creative side over here, you've got your analytical side over here, but in the middle, when you meld those two together in our industry, that's where the magic happens.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Kate. I really
Yeah,
appreciate
thank
it.
you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Fashioneering Lab, and congratulations on all the things you guys are doing.